51.1789 degrees north, 1.8262 degrees west. These coordinates lead you directly to the incredible landmark that we know now as Stonehenge. A bizarre ring of 13-foot-high stones famously plateaued by a set of horizontal stones is something that we as a species have been intrigued by for almost as long as modern civilization has been around for. Standing proud for over 5,000 years, and while we have a general idea for what its purpose was, which is a burial ground with deposits apparently containing human bone from nearly as far back as 3000 BC, there was almost no way to know for sure. So, very likely it is a mystery that will last until you, me, and anyone you've ever met or will meet have died. But even beyond the life that we will experience, Stonehenge will stand. A forever mystery that will lead us as a species to ponder what the purpose was, until, due to the inevitability of time, it will fade away into nothing. Nothing lasts forever, and even though that 5,000 years seems incomprehensible to us, the amount of time in the grand scheme of the universe is hardly worth a footnote. Eventually, Stonehenge will disintegrate, waste away, and dissolve into the earth as you and I will. A fitting circle of events, nature covering the man-made structure that apparently seems to bury humanity. So, recently I was playing Bioshock 2 again for the first time since the game came out, and while I was playing it, I felt a strange sense of, call it isolation, or something else, but I hadn't felt that feeling before while playing Bioshock. Of course, the game radiates a sense of loneliness, but while trudging through the bowels of the deserted city of Rapture, I got the strange sense of athazagoraphobia, which is the fear of being left alone and forgotten. This feeling led me to play both the original and Bioshock 2 back to back and reflect on this feeling that both games exuded. What I noticed and felt while playing the game is the inevitability of the end of time. As I wandered around the hollowed halls of Rapture, hearing the distant clangs of steel bursting at the seams with the piling water pressure pressing at the doors, the distant chatter of lost souls turned to splicers that are just shells of the people that they used to be, deranged and demented, watching the flickering lights of apartments, store lights, and signs. I just knew that beyond the obvious fall and collapse of Rapture, that this was a microcosm of the end of the universe. All of the structures, and all of the history, and all of the memories that Rapture encompasses would eventually be consumed by the ocean and swallowed by the force of the slow, benevolent life inside the water that surrounds it. And now, a big question that is poised throughout the runtime of the original Bioshock that is reinforced several times is the question of what makes a man. In the context of the remnants of Rapture, I find it to be truly a haunting question. All of the hallways that you wander through are decrepit and derelict, hardly a representation of the world that was originally intended. But what makes this question truly stand out to me is the people inside of Rapture. No one here shows any sort of semblance of what makes a man in the societal sense of the word, in modern times or in the fantasy world of Andrew Ryan and Bioshock. What you are fighting against aren't men nor women, but destroyed shells of people that no longer represent the people that they were. Essentially nimble zombies looking to feed on a different red liquid other than blood to satisfy their endless cravings. The thing that I think separates the first two Bioshock games in terms of the tone of the world is that Bioshock 1, despite its horrific world and awful environments, there seems to be a glimmer of hope somewhere underneath all of the water. With the way the game opens up, the plane crash and the eventual discovery of Rapture, Atlas, and the implication that you'll somehow find a way back to the surface, which is the initial driving force behind the game. Despite everything, it feels like you're being strung along through each terrible thing that happens to you that makes your meager crawl through the bowels of Rapture believable from a character standpoint. No gods or kings, only man. The slogan of Rapture is the first thing that you're likely to notice upon entering the lighthouse that leads down to the underwater city. We as a species consider ourselves immortal. It is only recently that I've started fully acknowledging, but still not quite accepting the fate that will befall all of us. We grow up thinking that death as a concept is always so far away, and that life will be with us longer than others because we're the special ones. we're the ones that deserve longer time on Earth than others, because no one else truly understands what makes each other special. Eventually, we all will die. Nothing will change that. We as a species are doomed to the fate of inevitability. No matter what we do, the outcome will really only ever be the same. The entire cast of Bioshock 1 is written to seemingly being trying to postpone that, to avoid it, to ignore it entirely. The core of Rapture was built on the individual proving themselves to be above their brethren, to prove themselves to be a higher class in terms of what they can provide, and Rapture provided as a reward for all of those prized individuals who could theoretically rise higher in the ranks. Whether they be artists, surgeons, philosophers, or any of the broken people that you come across, there is this sense of grandiose importance exuding from each and every one of them, and none of them are willing to look at the world around them. Every single person in all of Rapture is holding on to this life without realizing that they are all just slaves to the inevitability of time. Bioshock 1, in all of its abhorrent post-apocalyptic imagery, does remind us of the humanity that has been left behind. Through audio logs and memoirs left by people before the collapse of Rapture. These little audio logs make it well known to you that the people knew of the turmoil bubbling inside of the city before its eventual implosion. And hearing these people speak of what was so directly in front of their face reminds me a lot of the current climate of the world. Figuratively and literally. So many people on the bottom of the food chain that can see what's right in front of them, while the people higher up seem so distant and self-absorbed in their struggle for control and power that they either don't care or they can't see the issues truly at hand due to staring at their own reflection. As you discover audio logs from Bill McDonough, Bridget Tenenbaum, Peach Wilkins, Julie Langford, and even down to Frank Fontaine and Andrew Ryan himself, there was this constant feeling of seething evil that you can tell was permeating through the underbelly of the wooden floors inside the colossal, envisioned, impenetrable walls of Rapture. This sense that nothing was being done to calm the concerns of the little guy at the city that told them that their hard work would be recognized, rewarded, and essentially act as a personal reliquary, eventually turning into a devastating destruction of the self and the world around them. A man chooses and a slave obeys. The theme behind Bioshock 1 is this quote. Andrew Ryan, the singular vision behind Rapture, repeats this to you as you bludgeon him to death as a consequence of your will not being your own. In the end, none of the choices that you made really mattered, because they weren't your own. Bioshock 1 asks if you are a man, a person who can choose their fate, and the answer is that you cannot. And quite literally, as I'm writing this, I'm realizing that the reason that Rapture fell was not because that people weren't aware of the inner collapse and bubbling struggle that was befalling the average people of the city, but it was because of this quote here specifically.
These sad saps. They come to Rapture thinking they're gonna be captains of industry. But they all forget that somebody's gotta scrub the toilets. What an angle they gave me. I hand these mugs a cot and a bowl of soup, and they give me their lives. Who needs an army when I got Fontaine's Home for the Poor?
Everyone that became a part of Rapture moved there because of the alluring possibility of becoming their own man, their own unique vision that would guide the city under their finger. They were infatuated with being recognized for their own talents and prospects. They thought they would be the most idealized version of the American idealistic human family that could decide for themselves, but in the end, they really just were slaves to not only the inevitability of the destruction of the individualistic nature of Rapture, and not only slaves to the bootlicking of a societal inevitability, but the sheer added numerical factor of the human condition that was eventually bound to bubble, boil in trouble over the limited capacity and eventually beginning collapse of inside Rapture itself. Bioshock 1, to me, represents the last vestige of humanity. The announcement of the meteor, the beginning of the heat death at the edges of the universe, the revelation of whatever little may be left by the time you discover the underwater city. Bioshock 2, on the other hand, to me feels like the event horizon of the universe. The last few fleeting moments on the precipice of a dying star before being consumed by the singularity of time. There is no more hope here. There is only the crushing brutality from the weight of time. The flooding has increased, the sea life has begun truly taking back its place inside the walls of Rapture. The people are more depraved. The new leader of Rapture, Sophia Lamb, is uniting people of the city with a hope from a cult. A leader that acts as a fundamental dichotomy to Andrew Ryan that, to me, represents the futility of the human condition to hold on to life when presented with the inevitability of death. Where Andrew Ryan inspired hope through the individual, Sophia Lamb inspires hope through the connectivity of the people. Taking place around 10 years after the original game, you play as an inhabitant of the city itself, one of the original Big Daddies, that is entwined with one of the little sisters, Eleanor, who at some point becomes a beacon of light for the future of Rapture, in contrast with the glimmer of hope that Bioshock 1 barely scrapes by with. Bioshock 2, in my opinion, is riddled with hopelessness. Being a Big Daddy means that no matter what, your fate is tied to the demise of Rapture. There is no hope of escaping, and the best that you can hope for is just finding your little sister. No matter what actually transpires at the end of your story, there isn't any direct hope beyond reconnecting with her and presumably both of you perishing in the eventual, literal collapse of the underwater city. Within the halls of Rapture in Bioshock 2, there is a sense of absolute isolation. Seeing the effects of time and lack of attention given to the structures holding up what remains of the city, it becomes a window into the past the same way an old photograph does. A faded away memory that you can almost wipe the smudge off the film and fill in the blanks with a sense of clarity that only a vivid imagination can. While I played through the campaign of Bioshock 2, I just thought about how after this final trudge through Rapture, it would very likely be the last time anybody ever got to experience the city. From now on until the end of time, it would become corroded and forgotten. Rapture, in all of its opulence, its promises, and withheld dreams, was always doomed to the same fate that befalls all of us, and the universe itself. The end of humanity, whether it be from the eventual course of time, or due to our own self-sabotage, makes me think of the silence that would befall the world once we are gone. The streets once filled with the noise of blaring car horns and cheering sports fans all brought to a deafening silence. How many millennia would pass before any true sentient life forms rediscovered the world as a place to discover and not only inhabit? All the while, just like Stonehenge before it, Rapture would lie dormant and silent for all of that time. The water pushing against its walls until the windows shattered and the interior flooded, like an underwater supernova, eating itself alive from the inside out. Everything that Rapture was and could have been will be swallowed up by the nature that surrounds it, and then it would lie there, forever, until the end of time. A man chooses, a slave obeys, and we are all slaves to time.
Tomato is a fruit, but it's also a vegetable.